Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of C&F Talks. Today, I have with me David Hamilton, who's a partner at Howard Kennedy. And David's going to be speaking at our Financial Services Investigations and Enforcement Summit, which is being held in London on the 27th of June. David, good morning.
Morning, Morris. Great to be with you.
Great to have you with us. Let's turn to our first question. With internal investigations coming under increased scrutiny and recent high-profile cases being criticised for a perceived lack of independence and rigour, what can firms practically do to mitigate the risk of criticism when conducting investigations?
Well, it's certainly a topical issue. I think the recent article in the FT highlighted some of the key concerns that stakeholders and the public at large have expressed about how certain internal investigations have been run. Colourful words like whitewash and sham have been used quite liberally. Whilst it will often be the case that the outcome of an internal investigation will be met with mixed responses, as firms seek to manage the public relations fallout from an investigation, I think the article highlights at least three key lessons. I think the first is independence. So firms should give careful thought at the outset as to whether instructing a firm that isn't its regular business as usual advisor will ensure the degree of independence to persuade not just the public, but also regulatory and law enforcement authorities that the investigation will be conducted without let or hindrance. Not that I should say that regular advisors would in any way breach their own obligations to act with independence and integrity, but sometimes I think perception is a key factor. I think the second is terms of reference, and I think that this can be linked to the comment I've just made about independence. In order for an investigation to be truly independent and be seen as such, the firm must be prepared for the investigation team to set the parameters and go where the evidence leads. Of course, the investigation can't descend into a fishing expedition, and it must be proportionate to the issues that have been identified. But at the end of the day, the authorities in particular would need to be comfortable that the investigation was thorough, rigorous and defensible in order to give any credit to it. Finally, legal privilege. Whilst the FT article highlighted criticism of firms hiding behind privilege and not disclosing the conclusions, I do think a balance needs to be struck. Legal privilege is a fundamental right that's the heart of our legal system, and any waiver would need to be considered extremely carefully, whether that's to a regulator or to any other third party, because it can not only, I suppose, give rise to enforcement risks by providing the regulator potentially with the ammunition to fire back at the firm, but also in the context of civil litigation risk and they're on the risk of unhelpful information getting into the public domain.
Yeah, it's a very difficult area, isn't it? I mean, turning to the PRA, what are your views on its early account scheme, under which firms can share the results of an internal investigation in return for a discount on any potential eventual penalty?
I think, like many incentives of this nature, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I think certainly two of the more prominent positives are the potential reduction in the length of the PRA's investigation, which are currently averaging over 2 years at the moment. The provision by the firm of a factual account of the matters under investigation would, one would hope, guide the PRA's approach, avoiding duplication. So, for example, re-interviewing relevant individuals or going over old ground, and cutting to the core issues that have been identified by the firm. Now, of course, that presupposes that the early account is of the necessary quality and robustness, and how much confidence rather the authority can have that the firm's investigation is sufficiently robust to merit reliance, which of course is one of the reasons why the account must be signed off with an attestation by a relevant senior manager, which obviously clearly increases the risk profile for senior managers who are signing off on these investigations as to the process followed, confirmation of robustness and diligence, and that the account is an accurate reflection of the internal investigation. So I think one of the first key takeaways from this is that any firm that was considering entering into the scheme would need to be absolutely clear that its internal investigation and its methodology is copper-bottomed. The other incentive, of course, is the potential for a greater discount on the financial penalty, up to 50% instead of the standard 30% for early settlements. Although, as I say, that maximum figure will be reserved for the most fulsome, robust, cooperative self-reporting. So there's still a risk, I think, of a firm entering into the scheme, and if it's not handled appropriately, might actually find themselves even worse off than they would have been had they not even bothered putting in the application form to the PRA. I think one of the other challenges that the scheme poses to firms, and this was highlighted in response to the consultation paper last year, relates to legal privilege. I've already touched upon the fact that this is quite a vexed question in the context of regulatory reporting. The FCA over the years has been quite vocal in its expectations that firms should seriously consider whether claiming privilege over investigation reports and materials is consistent with a cooperative and transparent approach. And I think the PRA is taking a very similar line here, because although it has said that nothing in the scheme is intended to circumvent legal privilege and the protections that it provides, there is a suggestion, at least, that firms need to be considering very carefully whether the assertion of privilege outweighs the benefit of having a very open and fulsome process. So I think I foresee some difficult conversations with the PRA moving forward. Ultimately, it's a risk-based decision for firms. It's voluntary. The PRA has said it won't make negative inferences where firms decide not to request it. But I would caution that firms need to have a very good understanding of the issues at play, or at least as much as they possibly can do before they apply, noting that there is actually a very limited time frame within which to put that application in. It's 28 days from the appointment of investigators, which really isn't very long.
Far from straightforward, isn't it?
Indeed.
Turning to the FCA, when and why should a firm notify the FCA about its own internal investigation?
I think the main point to remember is that unlike other sectors where self-reporting, for example, bribery, is voluntary, although it may be prudent, those firms under the FCA's auspices are subject to a broad range of reporting requirements when it comes to matters that need to be investigated. In the first place, there's Principle 11 of the FCA's Principles of Businesses, which requires firms to deal with the regulator openly and cooperatively and disclose appropriately anything relating to the firm of which the FCA would reasonably expect notice. Now, there's a bit of circularity in there, but the overriding principle is clear: be open and transparent with your regulator. Now, underneath that, you have the more specific reporting trigger points in Chapter 15 of the FCA's Supervision Handbook, which relates to matters having serious regulatory impact or significant breaches of rules or other provisions. So there is often actually no latitude as to whether a matter should be notified to the FCA. The million-dollar question is when, which obviously your question picks up on. Go too early, you risk setting hairs running only to discover that on closer inspection the issue is not as it first seemed. Go too late, and either the mischief is already done, or at any rate the FCA won't grant any credit for your openness and transparency because the horse is bolted. And it may well add a breach of reporting requirements on top of whatever the breach was that was the subject of that report. I think a good guiding principle in these situations for firms is you need to have done sufficient work to establish that there is a problem. the nature of the problem, and the steps that you will take to investigate further. I think much like the old adage, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. I think the FCA does value at least some preliminary work by the firm, so that they're not, being bombarded with unnecessary reports, but also that they can see that the firm has turned their mind to, look, this is the issue, but these are the steps that we need to take in order to address it. So I think a precautionary holding report to the FCA is oftentimes a prudent step to take. It doesn't need to be war and peace by any means. I think you just simply have to note that an issue has arisen, give the general nature of the issue, the fact that it's being investigated, potentially either internally or with the help of external counsel or external advisors, and the firm will keep the FCA updated on progress within a realistic but defined period of time. I think that way you discharge your initial reporting obligation without nailing your colours to the mast too soon. I think the overall point there is to try and keep your powder dry as best you can.
Yeah. So, I mean, once you've done that, I mean, how might the FCA want to make use of a firm's internal investigation? In conducting an internal investigation, what sort of standards of record keeping and evidence collection are required in anticipation of the possibility that the FCA might want to use the investigation as the basis for its own enforcement action?
I think these are really helpful questions. I think in terms of the FCA's use of a firm's internal investigation, I suppose I'd look at it in two main ways. I think firstly, if the firm has done a good job on the investigation and the report and the supporting materials, if shared, are robust and reliable, it should help to guide the FCA's own review and drive efficiencies, avoiding the duplication that we discussed in the context of the PRA's early account scheme just a moment ago. On a recent matter that I advised on, we disclosed an investigation report to the FCA, and this has actually helped to shape the FCA's ongoing inquiries. It has dramatically cut down on the scope of information requests. It's ensured that they're more targeted, and it's helped to also actually head off the risk of a skilled person being appointed under Section 166 of FSMA. So there is a definite advantage, I suppose, once that plunge has been taken and you have stuck your head above the parapet with the FCA and provided them with the materials. There are definite advantages to driving efficiencies in the FCA's ongoing investigation. Now, secondly, so I was going to say, secondly, in the FCA's hands, the firm's internal investigation materials are subject to statutory confidentiality restrictions, and that's under Section 348 of FSMA. There are, however, gateways by which the FCA can share materials with other authorities and bodies, and this is one of the main risks for firms handing over materials. You just don't know where they could end up. If a firm has parallel proceedings by another authority or another jurisdiction, by waiving privilege and disclosing materials to the FCA, there is at least an increased risk of those materials finding their way into the possession of other investigating authorities, which may well be a case of the law of unintended consequences. Similarly, it's a point that I always raise with clients when considering whether to disclose anything to the FCA. Don't assume that the FCA will only use the information for the strict purpose of the disclosure. So in other words, if you provide a document to FCA supervision, they can share it with their enforcement colleagues, primary market colleagues or others. So extreme care needs to be exercised. You also mentioned in terms of the standards of record keeping and evidence collection. Now, funnily enough, actually, I do have a live matter that's entirely on point with this. Now, in relying upon our report, the FCA has sought assurances about the forensic integrity of the investigation, including the parameters of the investigation, decision logs, data gathering, the use of third-party providers. Now, I think it's fair to say it's long been a standard practice for internal investigations of any great size, complexity, sensitivity, or significance to be conducted with the support of ISO accredited forensic service providers. Now, we routinely use these providers to go into clients' IT systems, to image
Mm,
servers, email
mm,
inboxes, shared drives, company phones, other devices, according to the agreed parameters of the review, um, ensuring that appropriate data protection impact assessments are completed to comply
yeah.
with GDPR. Now, once collected, the data is processed and uploaded onto an e-discovery tool for review, with the precise methodology for that review and reporting results having been carefully formulated. Now, that can include keyword search terms, date ranges, custodian
Mm,
filters, harnessing AI and other technological innovations to help identify relevant materials. Um, and in all of these steps, one of the FCA's main concerns is data integrity. So the forensic provider should be maintaining a chain of custody to give
mm,
any future regulator or law enforcement authority confidence that the evidence was not tampered with, that there are no gaps in terms of who
mm,
had possession of the data at any one point in the chain, or indeed if its integrity was compromised in any way. So holding your own service providers to account for that is exceptionally important, and it's something that we're actually working through on a live matter just now.
mm. It really is a very complex area, isn't it, with so many potential pitfalls for the unwary. We're very much looking forward to exploring all of these issues and related issues in depth at the Financial Services Investigations and Enforcement Summit on the 27th of June. So for our viewers, we very much hope you'll be able to join us there to hear from David and the other exceptional speakers that we have at that gathering. So it just remains for me to say, David, thank you very much for sharing those thoughts with us today.
Not a problem at all. Many thanks.